that. And there we go.
With my backdrop here and make sure that nothing is too distractingly weird.
You're live. So.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is blessed to have with us author KJ Dell'Antonia, whose new book is In Her Boots. Before we begin, I would like to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of KJ's new book as well as her previous novel, The Chicken Sisters, and we would be delighted to hold copies of one or both for you or put them in the mail. All you need to do is go online or give us a call and we would be happy to connect you with these wonderful books. And now I'd like to welcome in KJ.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here in the virtual sense.
Well, we're delighted you could make it. My first question for you is I'm always fascinated by who authors were before they became a writer. So who was KJ before you became
but before KJ became a writer, she was a 4-year-old trying to make chalk work. So I've been a writer all along. I used to write Trixie Belden fan fiction. It was some fine stuff, and it's a shame that you will never probably get to read it because trust me that it was art. So I've always been a writer to some extent, but I did go through the long career trail of basically not believing that I could do this or was qualified to do this or had the right to try to do it. So I went to law school.
Okay.
Did that for I did multiple jobs in law because it didn't turn out that I was fine at them, but I didn't love it. I hated it. Forget I didn't love it. I hated it. I hated nearly every second of it. And someday I will go back and find the English teachers who write things on papers like, you're such a good arguer, you should be a lawyer, and say, okay, if you cross out arguer and write Xeroxer, that would be more like what being a lawyer is actually like, or was for me. So, and then I went and I was a journalist. I wrote for a long time for Slate, and then I moved on to writing for the New York Times. And that was obviously was great. It was very successful, wonderful. I really, really did like that part of my career. But in part, I chose to write nonfiction because it felt like a learnable skill that I could sort of sell. It felt more like a job. Felt more like something my father would approve of, although he didn't because liberal media. But let's put that aside. And so I did that for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. And it wasn't until I had some time and space after having written a nonfiction book, and I just happened to end up with a chunk of time that I felt like I could really throw into trying my hand at fiction, that I kind of pulled together the courage to make that happen. And it had a happy ending. It worked out really well. That was The Chicken Sisters. I had written fiction before, but I hadn't tried to do anything with it.
Chicken Sisters was a fascinating book because I never really thought about one town having 2 eating restaurants. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So the Chicken Sisters, the novel, is the story of these 2 sisters who end up running competing chicken restaurants in a very small town in Kansas, and competing on a reality TV food show, and discovering that competing on reality TV is not the answer to anyone's problems. So in case anyone out there is considering that as a career move, it doesn't help. But the truth is that my folks grew up in Pittsburgh/Frontenac, Kansas, which are 2 small towns that are very close to each other. And there are these 2 fried chicken restaurants that anyone who's familiar with Southeast Kansas will know, Chicken Annie's and Chicken Mary's. And I grew up going only to Chicken Annie's because you only went to one or the other. That's the way that life was. And I just always wondered, like, why would there be 2 with basically the same name? At some point, my mom said, well, I could tell you. And I was like, no, don't tell me. I'm just going to make something up. So that's The Chicken Sisters.
And then we come to your new book, which is In Her Boots. What can you tell those listening in about this book?
I can tell you that I wish I had written a book that was easier to describe. has this very intricate plot, which I love, and there's a lot happening. But there's also the real story happens inside the person who's at the center of it, as it should be in all books. But I will give it the old college try. I like to say that In Her Boots is it's about the adult that you think you've grown into, the child your mother will always see when she looks at you, and your terrible fear that your mother is right. And you will never actually be grown up. And then in reality, or in plot wise, it is about a woman who has made a fantastic life for herself on her own terms. She's a single woman. She's an adventure traveler. She's reestablished herself in many countries. She's very mechanical. She works with her hands. She works with animals. She's not actually she's a little bit of a reader. When we meet her, she's reading a book, but it's not, that's her, the center of her life is her physical world and the work that she does and the traveling that she does. But she's written a book about it because that's also who she is. And sort of put herself out there as a traveler and someone that you can model yourself after if you want to be a traveler. But she wrote it under a pseudonym, in part because she just has a lot of anxieties around taking on this persona. And she's always been able to kind of hide behind it. And when she comes home to the United States and to New Hampshire to hopefully inherit her family farm, her best friend convinces her that it's time to come out from behind the curtain. It's time to actually be the person that she really is, because her whole social media, there's no pictures on it. And she's used a fake name. So she's going to come out, and she's been invited to be on the Today Show, which is every author's dream. And all this happens in the first few pages of this book. Every author's dream, she's going to be on the Today Show. She's going to be Maggie Smith, the person that she's been sort of the modern pioneer girl, the person that she represents. And as she's about to do this thing, she realizes that the other guest on the Today Show that day to give advice to college graduates is her mother. And the one person in the world that she can't be her real self in front of is her mother. So luckily, from Rhett's perspective, because she's written this under a pseudonym and no one knows what she looks like, when the Today Show person says, "Which of you wrote the book?" Rhett shoves her best friend forward and says, "She did." This is a horrible mistake, and I don't recommend it. But for her friend's own reasons, her friend does this. And this should just be a one-off. And it's kind of within the context of their friendship that they would do. It's kind of a prank. To them, it's just a joke. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. But it turns out that Rhett has inherited her farm in conjunction with her mother, and that her mother has grave concerns about the fact that Rhett, as far as she's concerned, has done nothing for the past 20 years and is only going to be tied down and sort of destroyed further by this farm that her mother actually has strong feelings about. But her mother is super impressed by whoever it is that wrote this book. So, Rhett has a real problem, and there is no obvious solution. And we kind of take off from there, and we go to the farm, which Jasmine is in no way equipped to deal with. That's the friend. And Rhett really is. And Rhett has to convince her mom to give her a chance. But really what she has to do is figure out how to just own all the pieces of herself and put them all together into one human being, and then be that person, which sounds easy, but for me, it's actually, that's sort of one of the great challenges of life, is how can you pull together all the different yous that are you and just be that. So like I said, it didn't turn out to be. Next time I'm writing a book where it's like, it's what happens when a little kid and wishes he's grown up and now he is.
Yeah.
See how easy that was? It's not hard. It's not easy to think of though.
No, it's a very textured, a very rich book. There's a lot going on in the storyline. Rhett as Maggie, her fictional book is The Modern Pioneer Girl's Guide to Life, is it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And she creates this alter ego for herself, and that's kind of how she gets through difficult situations. And I thought that was very, very insightful. And can you talk a little bit about the importance of everyone having an inner alter superhero?
I think I think a lot of us do. Maybe we just don't name them. My best friend and I growing up it was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. We called her Today's Action Woman. And then when we grew up, especially in our 20s, we would call each other, and when we were in difficulties, one of us would jokingly say, well, what would Today's Action Woman do? And we would laugh because, Today's Action Woman would power through, and she would bake the bread and raise the child and bring home the bacon and fry it up in the pan. And that's actually kind of where she came from. But it was kind of real too. Like, what would the person that I want to be do? And that's Red has sort of just really personified that. And then she's become that person to a large extent, but she just can't see it. But her friend can.
Yeah, people can often see in us what we can't. We're kind of blind to that fact. I also, and I could be wrong, but was your writing or kind of alluding to the Modern Pioneer Girl's Guide to Life your way of paying your own homage to writers like Laura Ingalls Wilder and Ellen?
Absolutely. Yes. There are iterations of this book with a much stronger Laura Ingalls Wilder vibe. But yes, absolutely. And not just Laura Ingalls Wilder, the character, but Laura Ingalls Wilder, the writer. Laura Ingalls Wilder, she was a farm journalist. She wrote like newspaper columns. She was really, and then her daughter was also a really cool and amazing journalist and a traveler. So very, very much like my character in some ways. And then they came together to write these stories about, what a woman who's kind of become an icon, but wasn't necessarily the real, we all know that there's
fiction
elements of that are fiction and elements that are not. And certainly we all know that the things that, drove people into the prairie didn't turn out to all be the greatest things, but
yeah,
it was what it was. But yes, the Modern Pioneer Girl is absolutely an homage to Laura Ingalls Wilder and all things Little House.
That's wonderful. One of the other things I appreciated, and as I thought more about it, was how you write about the relationship between Rhett and her mother, Margaret, because in some ways they're complete opposites in their approach to life and what Rhett's mother wants for her, what Rhett wants for herself. And even the title, I think, In Her Boots, you're kind of thinking about these two characters as the novel progresses, come to appreciate the other in ways.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about the mother-daughter dynamic and that?
Yes. They're very similar in that they're very strong and they're very stubborn and they're very independent, and they both have a terrible time asking anyone else for anything, including each other. And they just really struggle. And I think so a big part of what drives Rhett to write under a pseudonym and to sort of hide herself is that she doesn't want to face the disappointment that she feels that she is to her mother, who is an academic and a college president and just thinks of very, very different things, leads a much more in her head life, whereas Red is much more about hands and body and being out in the world. It turns, Red is kind of right about what her mother wants for her, but her mother also needs to realize that what she thinks she wants for Red, she thinks she has a external picture of what she wants for Rhett, but what she really wants is more of an internal thing. And so this isn't, it's not as simple as, oh, you thought I wanted you to be successful, but really I just want you to be happy. It's really, I do want you to experience this kind of success because I think that is what makes people happy. And so they kind of both have to realize that, we all need to have to find our own way to what makes us happy and who we are in the world. So her mother has to, she has to at least open up to changing. She didn't move that far in the book. She's pretty set in her ways, but she starts to move.
Yeah. Another terrific thing about the book is the setting, because it's taking place in a small town and on a farm that Rhett and her mother inherit. And what I especially appreciate is how you write about farming life in a realistic way, not the Instagram pretty version we get in so many other books. Farming life is tough. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I really enjoyed that. That is was one of my favorite parts of writing this. I do live on a farm. I'm fortunate not to have to try to make my money that way. But I have a really deep and abiding understanding of how hard that there's whole chunks of discussion about the economics of having a farm stand and hay in your fields that are on the floor, because my editor was like, really, for most of us, this is, I was like, okay, sorry, you're right. You're right. But yes, we live here. We have fields that we hay. We have animals. I spent 6 years doing those chores every morning that she wakes up and does, only for a lot more horses, and waking up kids to do it as well. We have since kind of transitioned to a life where other people, we rented it out. Basically, it's still here, and it's still part of some of my kids' life, but somebody does it and tries to deal with the economics of it in a different way. But yeah, it's not. I mean, it is Instagram pretty. It's very pretty.
Yeah.
But it's also really, really, really hard, and hard in some ways that people don't think about. I mean, there's the physical sort of hard mornings, but there's just also, I mean, the economics of it are bonkers anymore, and have been for a long time. It's kind of interesting. There was a lot of this that sort of doesn't make it into the book.
Well, I think people don't always realize that if you are on a farm and you have animals, you can't just pick up and go. It's like every day there's a commitment to taking care of things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can't, it does tie you down, which is sort of ironic from Rhett's point of view, because, she's been a traveler, but it's also what her mother fears so much for her, is that she's going to get sort of sucked into this and never be able to get out, which is kind of what happened in her mother's eyes to her father. Mm-hmm. But, he probably saw it differently. So, and that's kind of an iconic American story, is the farm that you either escape or you want to stay with, and it's just a tiny part of the book, but it's definitely in there.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about your writing process now? If I remember correctly, when I was looking at some things about you, you have a tendency to write a book and then search for the story.
Unfortunately, yes. I think I've done a little bit better with that in the book that I'm working on now, but hey, ask me when it finally comes out, and I may be like, yeah, I wrote it, and then I figured out what it was about, and then whoops. Hand gestures, they're very tough for earphones. And then, so yes, I have a tendency to write to find the person, and then write to find the story, and probably to write too much. But writing it tends to be how I think. If I just sit down and say, I'm just going to think, I think that I'm thinking, and I believe that I've come somewhere, but I often end up, I haven't done the work. So I actually try, just for the sake of, carpal tunnel syndrome, to do early drafts more by hand now that I understand that I'm probably just going to have to redo the whole thing anyway. I kind of do it this way, and then I type.
Now, you started out writing nonfiction and you're writing fiction. Was that a big change for you? Are there things that you can do in fiction that you couldn't, obviously, in nonfiction?
It was a big change, and so one of the things I've discovered about writing fiction is that it needs to be bigger than life. Like, it needs to be believable. You can't have, if the writer comes to a point and they're like, well, wait, that would never happen, then you've lost them. So it has to be believable, but it also has to be big enough to capture us. So there's this sort of line between the amount of dramatic stuff that you want to have happen in order to make the story work. And as a journalist, I really tended, especially in the beginning, to limit myself, to be very much like, well, we have to be realistic, and we have to, we can't have a coincidence, or we can't, these people wouldn't, they might have this deep conversation, but they would probably only have it after like 3 hours of having a different conversation. Nobody wants to read the 3 hours of them getting to it. So to lean in to making the bigger fictional stuff happen that sort of reveals the truth that's inside of it, that took some learning. It was a challenge.
I think you've also written, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that you love to write fiction because characters can say what they really mean.
Yeah, and or they cannot, because they need to be realistic, and they need to, sometimes we don't say what they really mean. But yes, I really, I love that moment when the people finally say the thing to the other character that they've been wanting to say all along, or, they finally realize what it is that they've been wanting to say all along. And we don't really get very many of those in life. We tend to sort of circle around them, and maybe at some point we write someone a note and we say, this is what I've always wanted to thank you for. But to give people that moment of being together and having to hear what the other person really wants to say. So it's not just about saying what you really want to say, but making the other person actually hear it. I think that's I really like that.
I think I'm also correct in what I read, that you are a fan of memoirs, and in some ways, In Her Boots kind of takes that as a jumping off point for what if someone wrote a book where they reveal all these things, what are the repercussions? How do you deal with it? Why do you think people are so fascinated with other people's life stories? And how do you, as a writer, channel that into your novel?
I think we all, our own heads get really noisy and often unpleasant. So getting out into somebody else's head, even if it is also noisy and unpleasant, at least it's it's a change. It's an opening. So I love a memoir that puts you into someone else's headspace for a while. And I also love it from a separate writery point of view, because it gives you, the way that you feel about everything is not the way everyone feels about everything. So to have all these different experiences and sort of get to live them through other people's memoirs is, to me, is just fantastic. So, and In Her Boots comes from a lot of places, but one of the things I was really thinking about was Elizabeth Gilbert and Eat, Pray, Love, which, people either love or hate, and I happen to have loved it, but it doesn't even matter, because when you read that she is not someone who thought that she was going to be famous for that, right? She had written other things. She anticipated writing other things. And so she had to really come to terms. And we've all kind of been able to see that, because at the same time, social media became a thing, and she did get out there to some extent. And I love her work. I like what she does, but I have also really appreciated over the last 20 years trying to watch her navigate the fame that came from Eat, Pray, Love, which really, to me, reads as something that she thought, 20 people would read. And also, as someone who edited personal essays for many, many years at the New York Times, I spent a lot of time talking to writers and saying, okay, I want you to remember that the one person you don't want to read this may be the only person that reads it. They will read it. Like, I guarantee you, the one ex-boyfriend that you're hoping will never see this is going to be the only person that emails you about it. So, you need to go into this knowing that you have opened that. And it kind of fascinates me about memoir, which is a thing I don't think I will ever write, kind of partly for that reason.
There's been a lot of talk, what they now call an author's brand, but what's also kind of equated with an author's voice, their literary style. If you were looking at your novels and someone asked you about them, how would you describe your author brand, your author voice?
I think that, I think I tell true stories in a fun and accessible way. And when I say I tell true stories, but they're they're fictionalized. I'm writing to help us think about the things in our heads that we wrestle with. But I want to do it. I want to be entertaining. I want to I want to give everybody a great ride along with that thing that you end up having to think about. So that's how I probably describe my voice. And, when I think about what my topic is, because I do seem to come back to the same thing over and over again. And it's unquestionably the challenges that we face in figuring out what's going to make us happy.
I think, at least from my perspective as a reader, that your novels, there's a warmth to them. There's a definite connection
That's
with
very
the
nice.
characters. You definitely, whether you like them or dislike them, in the case of Red's mother, you understand them. There's you have a sense of wit. There's some humor to your writing. Can be dry or right out there, but it's there. And there's also a lot of wisdom in what you're telling readers. You may not get it at the beginning, but they're books that you enjoy, but you also think about afterwards, which is not an easy thing to do.
And that's wonderful. That would certainly have been, that's the kind of thing I hope that people will say about them. And sometimes I get to the end. Somebody read me a piece of In Her Boots recently, and I was like, wow, I wrote that? That's cool. I knew I thought it, but I didn't know that I managed to put it into words in that particular way. So it was a nice moment.
In addition to writing yourself, you have helped other people write. Has that influenced you in your own, teaching, working with other writers? Does that kind of impact you in turn? Does it influence how you write now?
It definitely does, because when you help somebody else, when you read somebody else's work, whether it is a 1,500 word essay that needs to be an 800 word essay, which was absolutely my specialty for many years, or a book where they've written a lot around something and need to figure out what it is that they're actually trying to say. When you help other people to do that, it really, for me at least, it really reminds me to look carefully at what it is that I'm doing, and to remember that in every book, while there may be a lot going on, there's really one story, and you need to stick with it as a writer and fully explore it. And in the best books, everything plays in to that one story. And I think what I see when I work with other novelists, and a mistake that I myself have absolutely made, is to think, well, I need a lot of exciting subplots. I need other stuff to be going on. There needs to be something else happening for these characters. And when you read a good book and really pay attention to how much of that there is, there's remarkably little. You're just filling in a lot in your head. So I think that working with other writers as a reader and as an editor has helped me to learn to trust the reader more.
You've been writing for a while now. As you look back, what do you know today as a novelist, as a writer, that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting out years ago?
I wish I had understood earlier, and I definitely understand it now, that this is both a art and a craft. And there are things that you can be learned and that you need to learn to successfully tell a story. And there are people that can transcend the sort of traditional, particular Western methods of storytelling, but you need to know them. And to understand them, and to understand what readers' expectations are. And there's no, writing a straightforward book that meets the expectations of the Western reader is hard enough. You don't have to try to do the other stuff. So I think if I had understood sooner that it's enough to do it well in a traditional way, I think I would have been faster. Writing that first book would have been easier if I hadn't sort of tried to reinvent the wheel myself.
In Her Boots, social media plays a role as Rhett's author career kind of takes off. What role does social media play in your life as an author? Do you have particular platforms that you are favor? Do you wish sometimes you could just be like Rhett and have a pseudonym?
I do Instagram, but I do Bookstagram. Like there's pictures of me because there's pictures of me and I'm happy to share that, but and farm stuff, but mostly it's books because I love sharing books. So the thing I finally came to after many, many years of wrestling with social media, I mean, probably some portions of the social media challenges of my book come from the fact that when I started at the Times in 13, I guess, when I had a social media presence, but they were very much like, you need a social media presence and, get yourself on Twitter. Now they actually don't really want you to do this anymore, but the times have changed. Get yourself on Twitter, get yourself on Facebook, put everything you write, put everything you read, put everything you're willing to out there. I mean, if I had been willing to, put my kids all over this stuff and they would have just ramped that up without a whole lot of thought for what that might mean to me or those kids, because that's where we were in 13. We didn't know. That's not an indictment of the social media people at the time. So I had to make decisions around how much of that I wanted to do, and I sort of started with the trying to maybe just put it all out there and be of social media, and I couldn't do it. To some extent, I'm a public person. This is my real name, and I write, and I like the level of success that has given me. But I don't need for you to already know where my kids are going to college, because I've put it all over the internet or whatever. So I had to draw those lines. I used to Twitter a lot when I was a journalist, and it was fun, but I got off in 16, like many people. And now I've settled into what I love, which is I will talk about books all the live long day and well into my sleep. So I share that on Instagram, and that's what I do. And I enjoy it. And I don't do any more of it than I enjoy, really.
Great. I'm delighted to hear that you're a big book person. Are there titles that you would be willing to share with those out there that you?
Yes, I even have a couple sitting here. So I am currently enjoying The Truth About Ben and June. I've got a little to go, but I am very confident that Alex Keister is going to stick the landing. This is going so well. And the funny thing is, someone else who read both pointed out to me, it's also about learning to be your whole self in the context of your relationships. But these are two very young new parents that are struggling, and it's a dual POV between the two of them, and it's a way of telling that particular story that I haven't read before. I really like it, and one of the protagonists is a dancer, so that's also a world. I'm betting the author has a dance history, because that's also a world I'm not familiar with, so I really like that. That's very cool. So I've enjoyed that, and I also really liked this. The Boys by Katie Hafner. But the problem with this book is I can't really tell you anything about it.
Okay.
Or it just spoils it. Like almost. So if you read the flap copy and it sounds entertaining, it is entertaining. If you liked We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, which I think is Karen Fowler, it's totally different, and yet there are some similarities, which is why you can't tell it, because you can't tell anybody about it. Going into that book cold is a very different experience than going into knowing what it's about, right?
Yeah, it's probably
you remember what it
girl or something like that.
Yeah, well, We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves is the one where you think it's a kid. I can't, I'll ruin it. You can't. Yeah. I've heard the author even talk about that too. So,
is there one particular author that you would like drop everything, push people out of the way, run to a bookstore to get a copy of their new book?
Well, if Dorothy Sayers was still writing, I would do it for
really?
her.
I had no idea.
I know, that's kind of a surprising one, isn't it? Or Marjorie Allingham, either one of them. If you go back and read their books, they kind of, it's a little bit like what you were saying about me, which is so wonderful, that there would be these stories, the murder mystery story, but there's so much more to them, so many more layers. I loved both of those women. They're not likely to write anything else, sadly.
No, I think there was one author that finished Dorothy Sayers' unfinished manuscript.
She did, and then she wrote 3 more, and then do you know what happened? She died.
That's right. That was Jill Patton Walsh.
Yes, and I grieved because she had done such a good job with it. So they're literally all sitting. They're all right there. Yeah.
So I'm guessing Agatha Christie, not a big fan.
I loved those, but I grew up on those. Like I cut my teeth on those. So I haven't read those in a long time. I've been thinking I'm a second, Spanish is my second language. And I've been thinking I might read them in Spanish because I feel like that would be good for my Spanish and I could probably handle them because they're not super complicated.
No, it seems like in most people that come into the Poison Pen are either Team Dorothy or Team Agatha. So you
yeah, I'm Team Dorothy.
It looks like we do have one or two questions from people tuning in. There is one person who'd like you to talk a little bit, if you can, about your relationship with your publisher when it comes to choosing the design of your book, I guess, and the titles. Do you have a lot of input?
So In Her Boots, they nailed the cover first shot. Like just, I mean, we were floored. Chicken Sisters, the first cover came back and it was every book you've ever seen that's about the little building in the little town of somewhere. That's what it looked like. And when we went back, they came up with this wishbone, which was genius. Like I had nothing to do with it. It was sheer solid genius. And the boot is also like the complete genius. The In Her Boots, its original title was, that I called it, was The Modern Pioneer Girl's Guide to Life, which is the name of Rhett's book. But my editor felt like people would think it was a self-help book, which is not. And then I wanted to call it Wish You Were Her, which I still think is really fun, but it has Google problems.
Oh.
Because the minute you start typing that, it'll give you Wish You Were Here, which has been written. There's a couple of them. And coincidentally, and this is why I'm really glad we didn't do it, it's Jodi Picoult's latest was Wish You Were Here.
Yeah.
So that would have been kind of a mess. So my editor was right there, although I still think it's fun. And it's not dissimilar, like Wish You Were Her, In Her Boots. Those are kind of both the same idea. So we brainstormed around and came up with In Her Boots, and it took me a while to love it. And now I love it. Like now I can't imagine it being called something else.
Another person would like, if possible, for you to talk about the idea of writing and what advice you would give to an aspiring novelist.
The advice I would give to an aspiring novelist is kind of goes back to what I said about what I wish I had known sooner, which is you can learn this. You can get, I mean, just go pick one great novel writing book, grab Save the Cat, Rats a Novel, which is a book I adore, and write a book to that formula. You won't write a formulaic book because if you manage to write a whole book, it's pretty hard. And then you put your heart and yourself into it, it's pretty hard to end up with something formulaic. I mean, and hey, if you hit on a formula and you can keep doing it and turn yourself into John Grisham, that I think we would all be fine with that too, right? And he's not, I mean, his first books were anything but formulaic, but people will levy that charge against him, which I don't think he deserves. But that's what I would say. Get that book and just lean all the way in to writing exactly the way they tell you to. And then when if you start feeling hemmed in by that, and you start wanting to do something different, okay, you're on your way. Like you're doing it. You're doing the thing. So that's what I would say. This is a learnable thing. The problem with that is it's not a fast learnable thing. You can't. It's years, and that's why most people don't finish. It's a long-term commitment and a long haul for most of us to finish a book. There are people that can do it faster than me, but there are a lot of them. And I'm still decently fast at like a year and a half to 2 per book at the moment. And then there are people that the book a year, that's hard. I think they're like rolling. They're overlapping. And then there are, some great romance. My best friend is Serena Bowen. She writes 3 romances a year and they're fantastic. But she's been doing it for a really long time. She's learned.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more recent challenges for a lot of authors is the expectation that everyone writes on the same schedule. It's like readers want something every 6 months or every 3 months, and you may be someone who it takes you 5 years to write a book. And if it's a good book, that's what we want. But the market is saying, no, you have to get your name out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really true. And we stick, we're still here for Lauren Goff. She doesn't need to come up with one every year, because they're worth it. Right. So you may be that, but you're probably not somebody who's going to turn out a great book in 30 days.
Yeah.
The first time. Someday, maybe. First time, probably not. But if you are, yay. You know, we're all here for that too, right? But mostly that's what I would say is you can learn this if you really want to.
Another person wants to know if Jasmine got her talent for baking from you.
Yes. Yeah. I love to bake, and that. So writing about baking is a fun, approach to it. And also, sometimes baking is intricate and long and finicky, and it's much easier to write about it. But yeah, she gets her love of doing that from me. I thought about being a pastry chef briefly, and then I came to understand what the hours would entail and decided that wasn't something I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of early mornings, but then farm life is a lot of early mornings.
Also true. I'm not people that know me still marvel at the number of years I spent getting up at 5 to I love animals. Okay, what can I say?
Are you, another person wants to know if you're willing to talk about what comes next, what you're working on?
So I have finished and am revising for submission to my editor, who has not yet bought this or read it and may in fact loathe it. What I hope will be my next book, and I can tell you that there are witches involved. Oh. And yet there are witches with complicated relationships with their mother and their small town who have a hard time figuring out what makes them happy. So it's still very, very, very much me, only with witches and magic tarot cards. And again, you may read my next book 2 years from now and be like, there are no witches in this. And that will mean this one didn't take off the way that I hope it will. And that's okay. I don't mind sharing that. It may be a bust. I may have to write a new one.
We'll cross our fingers. Before we run out of time, I can't believe it's gone by so fast. How can those tuning in and other readers learn more about your books? Do you have a website?
I have a website. It's kjdell'antonia.com. And while you're there, you can sign up to get my vaguely weekly email, in which I put a read, an eat, and a listen. So there's always a book, and then there's something to either make or buy that is fun to eat. And then usually a podcast, sometimes an audiobook. It depends. And you can follow me on Instagram, where, again, like I said, I'm a bookstagram. I do, there's a lot of In Her Boots right now, but you'll also find both the books that I just put out there on my lap. I don't like to just talk about my book. I like to talk about my books, but I really love talking about other people's books too.
Well, that's great. Time has just flown by. For those listening in, the Poison Pen has been just very fortunate to have with us as our author today, KJ Dell'Antonia. Did I get it right?
You did, yes. It's exactly like it's written, but it looks long.
Whose new book is In Her Boots. I think it's a wonderful book any time of the year, whether you're reading it for the beach or in winter. There's a lot to enjoy and consider in this book, and I want to thank KJ for joining us virtually.
Thank you so much. It was, it's really great. I have known of your store. I've only been in it once because I'm not local, but I've known of it as, I grew up as a mystery fan. So, I just love it. So it's a delight to be here.
Well, we're thrilled you could be with us, and we're delighted for those that tune in. Look to the Poison Pen for more virtual author events, and thank you for joining us today.